All right, let's dive deep into Michelangelo's David. We're going way beyond that famous image, uncovering hidden stories and stuff. This video essay from Great Art Explained is going to be our guide, by the way.
It's amazing how visual it is, too. Really brings the analysis to
Oh,
life.
for sure, yeah. Get ready for some aha moments, folks, because we're about to unlock the secrets behind this masterpiece.
What gets me, honestly, is how much we learn about Michelangelo himself through David.
Mm.
His struggles, his choices as an artist. It's all there in the sculpture.
It's funny because, we think of Michelangelo as this, like, ultimate artistic genius, right? Larger than life.
Right.
But the video shows us that even he had insecurities.
Oh, totally. Michelangelo had doubts about his looks,
Mhm.
especially his broken nose. He even called himself ugly in his poetry.
Wow, it's kind of humbling to realize that someone so brilliant had those very human anxieties.
It is. But the amazing thing is how he seemed to use those feelings in his art. His drive for perfection, that's all over David. Maybe that came from wanting to overcome those insecurities, like leave a mark on the world.
Like, you think those insecurities were like the fuel for his talent?
Maybe, yeah. Adds a whole layer to how we see David's expression. That intense focus, the tension, it's like Michelangelo poured everything into this one figure.
I'm already seeing David differently. Not just a statue anymore, but a glimpse into the artist himself. But how did he even make this thing? It's huge. The video mentioned his technique was unique.
Very unique. A lot of artists back then used models and markings, planned everything out. Michelangelo, he went mostly freehand. He could just see the finished figure in the block waiting to be set free.
Whoa, that's powerful. Almost like he wasn't creating it, but revealing it.
Exactly. And that led to this bold sculpting style. Starting from the front, working back, the form just emerges as he chips away.
The video actually shows some unfinished pieces. It's so cool to see those rough edges, the tool marks, like you can see the master at work.
It's a peek into his process, pure skill, pure intuition.
And to think, he tackled this massive project, almost 17 feet tall, with that freehand approach. Speaking of challenges, the marble block itself was considered flawed, right?
Oh yeah, the other sculptors had abandoned it. It was
Yeah.
narrow, and there was this hole already carved out,
Yeah.
right where David's legs would be.
They saw a problem, but Michelangelo saw potential.
Exactly, pure genius. Instead of being limited by those flaws, he used them. The narrow shape gave us David's slender build, that famous contrapposto stance, one leg relaxed, the other taking the weight. It's like the marble itself guided him.
He turned limitations into art. That's brilliant. And that brings us to another thing about David. How Michelangelo chose to show him, the whole biblical hero thing.
Most artists back then, they focused on David's victory.
Mm.
Standing over Goliath, all triumphant. Strength, conquest, the classic image.
Yeah, we see that a lot in Renaissance art, right?
Yeah,
Powerful stuff.
for sure. But Michelangelo, he went a different way. He captured David before the fight. That moment of anticipation, getting ready.
So not brute force, but mental strength, that
Yeah.
inner buildup before the clash.
Exactly. It's not about muscles anymore. It's about the tension, the inner struggle that comes before any great achievement.
You can't help but wonder what's going on in David's head. Is he scared? Determined?
No,
Michelangelo captures that so well.
absolutely. And this choice, showing David before the battle, it speaks to a bigger theme in Michelangelo's work. Real strength isn't just physical. It's about the will, the spirit, that belief in yourself.
That's a message that still resonates, for sure. But it's not just about the biblical story, right? What did David mean to Florence at the time? The video gets into the symbolism.
Well, Florence was this new republic, independent but small, surrounded by bigger powers. David, the underdog who wins, he became a powerful symbol for the city itself, their own strength, their resilience.
He embodies their courage, standing up to those who try to control them.
Exactly. And to really make that point, they eventually moved David. Not on the cathedral roof anymore, but right in the heart of Florence, the Piazza della Signoria.
So the placement itself was a statement.
Oh, absolutely. And even the direction he faces, south toward Rome. A subtle hint of defiance.
Wow, I never knew how much politics was tied into this statue. Adds a whole new layer to the story.
It does. And it shows how art can be more than just personal feelings. It can express the hopes and fears of a whole society.
Speaking of expressing, let's talk about that pose, contrapposto, right? The video explains it's natural but also dynamic, showing off the human form.
It comes from ancient Greek sculpture. Seeing it again in the Renaissance shows us how obsessed they were with those classical ideals.
I love how the video uses those colored lines to highlight the muscles in that contrapposto pose. tense and relaxed, like David's about to spring into action.
That's exactly it. Michelangelo wanted to capture that split second before movement, that surge of energy waiting to be unleashed.
It's amazing. And then there's the whole thing about David's proportions. The big head, big hands. Looks a bit off at first, but the video says that was intentional.
Remember, David was meant to be way up high on the cathedral roof, seen from below, like 80 meters up. Michelangelo designed those proportions for that specific view.
So what looks weird down here would have looked perfect up there.
Exactly. They even put a replica on the roof a few years back to prove it. The proportions were spot on.
That's mind-blowing. He was thinking ahead, understanding how perspective works.
He wasn't just sculpting a figure, he was sculpting an experience. Next level stuff.
So many aha moments already. But before we go on, I gotta ask. The nudity. For a Bible story, that's a bold choice.
It was bold, especially back then. But it fit right in with the Renaissance rediscovering classical art, celebrating the human form.
Like looking back at those Greek and Roman sculptures where nudity was common.
Exactly. They were bringing back nude figures, showing their appreciation for the beauty of the body, elevating the human to the level of the divine almost.
Art reflecting these big cultural shifts. It's fascinating. But the video also mentions that public nudity was still kind of taboo back then. That's why they made a fig leaf for David.
There's even a photo from the 1860s showing David with his fig leaf.
Yeah.
Funny how social norms change and how art gets caught in the middle.
Imagine trying to cover up this masterpiece, like putting a sweater on a Greek god.
Right. It's a clash of cultures, that's for sure. But speaking of clashes, the video brings up a good question. Why is David, a Jewish hero, shown uncircumcised?
That's a detail Michelangelo wouldn't miss. Was it on purpose or just an oversight?
Definitely on purpose.
Okay.
It reflects how they saw things during the Renaissance. Remember, they loved Greek and Roman art, and in those cultures, circumcision was considered, well, barbaric.
So they were putting their own cultural ideas onto a figure from a different tradition.
Exactly. And don't forget, the Catholic Church back then wasn't a fan of circumcision either. So there's a religious angle too.
They reinterpreted a Jewish figure within a Christian context. Makes you think about how art can be used to reinforce the dominant culture's ideas,
Very insightful. Art is never made in a vacuum. It reflects the beliefs and anxieties of the time it was created.
This deep dive is getting so much deeper than just facts about David. We're uncovering layers of meaning, history, even a little controversy.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore. Oh, and there's this one detail about David that always gets people talking.
Oh.
A bit of a sensitive subject, maybe. It's about the size of his
You're talking about?
his penis. It's relatively small.
Okay, I gotta admit, I did not see this deep dive going there.
It's important, though. And trust me, Michelangelo did this on purpose.
There's a reason for that.
Absolutely. Back in the Renaissance, you see, a small penis meant modesty, self-control. It was the opposite of those, wild satyrs and stuff, all about unbridled passion.
So even the little details are packed with meaning. Fascinating.
It is. Shows how much thought Michelangelo put into everything.
Yeah.
He wasn't just making a pretty statue, he was sending a message. Values that were important back then.
Wow. He thought of it all, huh? From the pose to, well, that. Speaking of details, the video also focuses on David's eyes. Apparently, he's got a slight strabismus, like his eyes are a bit misaligned.
Yep. Another example of Michelangelo's genius. He did that on purpose, to draw your gaze into David's eyes. Makes that intense look even stronger.
I never noticed that before. How much thought he put into everything, even a tiny eye detail. It's incredible.
And it's more than just the misalignment. The pupils are carved to catch the light in a certain way, bringing those eyes to life,
He was playing with light and shadow to create a feeling in the viewer. A master, no doubt. The video also talks about the jugular vein on David's neck. Really stands out.
It's easy to miss, but it matters. That vein, it usually pops out when someone's agitated, anxious.
Oh, so it shows David's state of mind before the fight.
Exactly. And get this, Michelangelo did this more than 100 years before scientists figured out how the circulatory system works.
Like he understood the body intuitively, even beyond what they knew back then. Mind-blowing.
It is. Incredible observation skills and total dedication to anatomical accuracy. He didn't just copy what he saw, he understood it.
And it wasn't just the neck vein. The video points out the veins in David's hands are different too. The raised left hand, holding the sling, has delicate veins, but the relaxed right hand, more prominent veins.
Yep, that's exactly how blood flow works. Relaxed hand, the veins show more. tense muscles, they kind of disappear.
He captured that too. It's like he wasn't just sculpting a body, but emotions, thoughts, all through anatomy.
I like that. It shows the depth of his genius. Not just a beautiful form, but a living, breathing, feeling being.
Makes me appreciate David even more. And to think, all that work, years of it. The video says he was totally dedicated to this project, worked in secret, pushed himself to the limit.
3 years, yeah. And stories about him attaching candles to his hat so he could work at night, barely eating or changing clothes. He was obsessed.
Obsessed, but in a good way, right? To create something like that takes that kind of commitment.
I guess so. But it also shows his passion, that burning need to create something amazing, something that would last forever.
And he definitely did that. David is iconic. It represents human creativity, the power of art. It's timeless. But it wasn't all easy, was it? The video mentions some drama about where to put the statue.
Oh yeah, when Michelangelo finally showed the finished David to the committee who'd commissioned it, they were blown away. Like, whoa, this is way too good for the roof, which was the original plan.
Imagine if it had ended up hidden up there. What a loss.
Total tragedy. Luckily, they decided to find a better spot, somewhere everyone could really see it.
But even then, they couldn't agree on the best spot, right? Leonardo da Vinci was on that committee, wasn't he?
He was, and he actually argued against putting David in a super visible location.
Why? Was it just an art thing, or was there some, rivalry going on between those two?
Hard to say for sure, but yeah, they were rivals. Both incredibly talented, ambitious, always competing for commissions, for fame.
Can you imagine those two arguing about where to put a statue? Adds a whole other level of drama to the story. But in the end, David went to the Piazza della Signoria, the heart of Florence.
A bold move, putting this symbol of strength and defiance right in front of City Hall. But it worked. David became the symbol of Florence, their spirit.
And moving this giant thing must have been a huge job. 40 men, 4 days, just to move it a short distance from Michelangelo's workshop.
It's a logistical nightmare. And it's funny, David was even flashier back then. The sling and the tree stump, they were covered in gold, added to the whole grand effect.
Oh, wow. I bet it was incredible. But even without the gold, David had a huge impact on Florence, on art in general.
Oh, absolutely. An instant icon. Artistic genius, human potential, all that.
This deep dive has been amazing. We went from just admiring David to uncovering all these hidden stories, the artistic choices, the history. This sculpture is a masterpiece for sure.
And there's one more thing about David that shows Michelangelo's genius, his vision. Remember how it was supposed to go way up on that roof, 80 meters high?
Yeah, and we talked about how the proportions were designed for that specific view.
Go get this. A few years back, they put a replica of David up there. Temporary thing, so people could see it the way Michelangelo intended. And guess what?
What? Don't leave me hanging.
The proportions were perfect.
No way. Seriously.
Seriously, the guy was a genius. He knew exactly how it would look from that distance, and he planned for it.
This deep dive is full of surprises, so much to learn. But I think it's time to move on. What happened to Michelangelo after he created this incredible work of art? What's the rest of his story? So after David, what's next for Michelangelo? Does he just retire on a beach somewhere?
Huh. Not quite. His life was as incredible as his art. He lived to be 88, crazy long back then. And the amazing thing is, he never stopped working, creating, pushing boundaries.
Almost like art kept him going, right?
Maybe, yeah. And it's interesting, he outlived his rivals, Leonardo and Raphael. Makes you think, how would art history be different without Michelangelo still around, influencing things?
Hard to imagine the Renaissance without those three. But where did Michelangelo end up? Did he die in Florence?
He died in Rome, actually, in 1564. But they brought his body back to Florence, buried him in the Santa Croce Church.
Seems right, To rest in the city he helped make famous for its art.
It is. And there's this beautiful thing. His tomb is just steps away from David, like they're connected forever, the artist and his creation.
I get chills just thinking about it. This deep dive has been wild. We learned about Michelangelo, his struggles, his genius, and how powerful his art still is. What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
I think it shows us that even the greatest artists are human, Michelangelo had all this talent, achieved so much, but he still had doubts, anxieties. He wanted to be perfect, but he turned all that into his art, and it's still inspiring people centuries later.
It's about the human spirit, right? Even when things are tough, we can create beauty, meaning.
Absolutely, and art can transcend time, connect us to the past. When we look at David, we're not just seeing a statue. We're seeing Michelangelo, his soul, his hopes, everything. Like having a conversation with him through his work.
I love that. Every masterpiece has a story behind it, deeper than just what we see.
Exactly. And those stories are out there, waiting to be discovered.
This whole journey into Michelangelo's David has been eye-opening. I see this sculpture in a whole new way now.
That's the beauty of art, right? It teaches us, inspires us, makes us see things differently.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I'm blown away by this great Art Explained video. So much detail, so many things I never knew. And the visuals are amazing. Everyone should check it out.
Definitely worth a watch.
So, before we go, here's something to think about. Do you think Michelangelo, with all his struggles and everything, could have imagined how powerful his David would become? How it would still captivate people all over the world?
Good question. It shows how timeless great art is. It goes beyond its time and place, speaks to something deep inside us, something universal.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Michelangelo's David, everyone.
My pleasure.